At 6:14 on a Thursday morning, my sister accidentally sent the photograph that ended my marriage. My husband was holding her newborn twins. A matching parent bracelet around his wrist carried his full name and the baby's hospital case number. Beneath the picture, Tessa had written, "At last, our secret has become a real family." She deleted it 11 seconds later. I had already saved it. My name is Allison Reed. I'm 37 years old, and I investigate bank fraud in Boise, Idaho. I spend my days studying forged signatures, hidden transfers, altered documents, and the tiny mistakes people make when they believe no one is watching. That morning, I realized I would have to investigate my own marriage. Grant had called me the previous night from what he claimed was a construction site in Twin Falls. He said a concrete delivery had been delayed and that he might not be home until Friday. But in the photograph, he was standing inside St. Catherine's private maternity center, 20 minutes from our house. He wore the blue sweater I had given him for Christmas. Tessa was visible in the mirror behind him, pale and smiling from a hospital bed. One twin rested against Grant's chest. The other slept in a clear bassinet beside a card that read, "Baby Boy Heart," my sister's last name. Grant called at 7:02. "Morning, beautiful," he said. Machinery clanged behind him. At first it sounded convincing. Then I noticed the same metallic crash repeated every 17 seconds with exactly the same rhythm. It was a recording. "I'm heading into a meeting," he continued. I stared at the photograph on my laptop. "How's the project?" "Complicated. I'll explain everything when I'm home." That was his first mistake. I didn't confront him. Anger makes people defensive. Evidence makes them honest. I told Grant I loved him, wished him luck with his meeting, and waited until he ended the call. Then I opened our accounts. For 13 years, Grant and I had kept mostly separate finances. He owned Reed Commercial Builders. I managed our household investments because numbers were my profession, and because, until that morning, I trusted him. 8 months earlier, he had asked me to add him as an authorized signer on an inheritance account my father had left me. Grant said he might need temporary access if a major client delayed payment. I refused. The account held $312,400. My father had earned that money running a small electrical company. He saved every invoice and receipt in a dented metal box beneath his desk. Before he died, he made me promise never to risk that money on someone else's business. At 7:31, I found the first transfer. $9,800 to Tessa Hart. The memo read, "Consulting." Tessa had never worked in construction. She taught yoga classes 3 mornings a week and had been asking our mother for grocery money since her divorce. I searched her name again. There were 11 transfers. $84,260 in total. Grant had paid the deposit on her apartment, 6 months of rent, private prenatal care, and $18,700 to a remodeling company for something listed as a nursery conversion. My hands remained steady until I found the source of the money. $41,000 had come from my father's inheritance. I downloaded every statement and opened the authorization records. Grant had submitted a form to the bank claiming I had approved him as a signer. My name appeared at the bottom. The signature was convincing. The upward stroke on the A was correct. The final letter in Reed curved the way mine did. Whoever created it had not simply guessed. He had studied me. But the form was dated November 17th. I had been in Denver that day, testifying in a federal fraud case. My boarding pass, hotel receipt, courthouse entry record, and security badge logs proved it. Grant hadn't only betrayed me. He had studied my signature carefully enough to steal from me. At 9:10, I called Helena Price, an attorney whose firm handled financial crimes and high-asset divorces. I sent her the photograph, bank statements, transfer records, and forged authorization form. She called me 12 minutes later. "Do not confront either of them," she said. "Contact the bank's fraud department. Change every password. Preserve the original files and photograph anything important in the house. We need to know how far this goes." By noon, the bank had suspended Grant's access pending an internal fraud review. Our joint credit line had been restricted, and copies of our tax returns, insurance policies, business filings, and property records were locked in the trunk of my car. At 2:46, Tessa texted me. "Hey, did you see anything weird in the family chat this morning? My phone was acting up." I looked at the framed photograph on my desk. It showed the two of us at my wedding. Tessa was 24, standing behind me with one hand on my shoulder. During her toast, she had cried and called me the safest person in her life. I typed, "No, everything okay?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. That evening, Grant came home carrying a duffel bag and smelling faintly of baby powder. He kissed my forehead. "You look tired." "Long day." He poured himself bourbon and told me about a fictional dispute with a subcontractor. I watched him lie with the same relaxed expression he used when discussing the weather. Then his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. "Tessa, your mom said Sunday works. She wants to meet them." Grant quickly turned the screen face down. "What's happening Sunday?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Dinner with Mom. Business stuff." I smiled. "Sounds important." After he went upstairs, I photographed the message and sent it to Helena. At 11:18, another notification appeared on Grant's tablet. This one was from Marilyn, his mother. I expected congratulations. Instead, it said, "Before you bring those babies into my house, tell Tessa she needs to explain the test. I will not keep another secret for you." Beneath the message was a scanned medical report bearing Grant's full name. It was dated 9 years earlier, during our first fertility consultation. One section had been highlighted in yellow. It stated that Grant had a severe congenital obstruction and an exceptionally low viable sperm count. Natural conception was described as extremely unlikely without treatment, and repeat testing was strongly recommended. The report did not prove the twins could not be his, but it proved that the photograph might contain a second lie. I did not sleep that night. At 6:40 the next morning, I forwarded Marilyn's attachment to Helena. The report came from Dr. Samuel Voss, a reproductive endocrinologist Grant and I had seen 9 years earlier. I remembered that appointment differently. Grant had refused to let me enter the room during his examination. A week later, he told me the clinic had found nothing significant and that his follow-up results were normal. After that, every failed treatment became my failure. For 6 years, I injected hormones into my stomach before sunrise. I endured 2 egg retrieval procedures, repeated transfers, an emergency operation after an ectopic pregnancy, and a miscarriage at 11 weeks. Grant held my hand in the hospital after the second loss. Then he whispered, "Maybe your body just can't do this." I had apologized to him. That memory nearly broke my control. Helena called at 7:15. "The report creates questions," she said. "It does not establish paternity. But the forgery and unauthorized transfers are separate. The bank wants a formal statement, and I recommend filing the divorce petition today." "Do it. Once it's filed, we'll arrange proper service." Sunday's dinner was in 2 days. I could have avoided the house completely, but I needed to understand Marilyn's role. She had possessed information that affected my body, my marriage, and almost a decade of my life. If she had known, then Grant and Tessa were not the only people who had allowed me to live inside a lie. I called her from my office. She answered on the 4th ring. "Allison?" I saw your message to Grant. Silence. Then she whispered, Does he know you saw it? No. Her breath caught. I can explain. Sunday. I'll be there before they arrive. She began crying quietly. I felt nothing. At 3:20 that afternoon, Helena called with another discovery. Public lien records showed 3 suppliers had filed claims against Reed Commercial Builders. Our joint tax returns revealed loans Grant had never mentioned, and copies of his business statements showed the company was carrying more than $400,000 in debt. The payments to Tessa had been listed as subcontractor expenses. Her rent, hospital bills, apartment renovation, and prenatal care had been disguised as business costs. He may have created false deductions, Helena said. The tax issues will require a forensic review once discovery begins. Grant's business was not thriving. It was collapsing. My inheritance had not only financed Tessa's pregnancy, it had helped Grant keep his company alive long enough to pretend he could afford a second family. That evening, he brought home Thai food and a bouquet of white lilies. For putting up with my schedule, he said. I thanked him and placed the flowers in the blue glass vase from our wedding. While we ate, he talked about expanding the company and purchasing land outside Meridian. Then he reached across the table and touched my hand. I've been thinking about us. I looked at his wedding ring. What about us? Maybe we should stop trying to have children. We've suffered enough. The cruelty of that sentence was almost elegant. He had spent 3 days holding my sister's newborn twins while preparing me to accept a childless marriage. I set down my fork. Maybe you're right. Relief crossed his face before he could hide it. That was his second mistake. On Sunday, I reached Marilyn's house at 4:35. She was waiting in the kitchen beside an unopened bottle of wine. On the table sat a faded manila envelope with my maiden name written across the front. I never meant for you to suffer, she said. You watched me suffer. Her eyes dropped. 9 years earlier, the fertility clinic had mailed an insurance copy of Grant's report to the policyholder address still listed in its records, Marilyn's house. She opened it because my name also appeared on the paperwork. I panicked, she said. Grant's father spent his entire life telling him that a man wasn't a man unless he continued the family name. I thought Grant would fall apart. So you hid it. I planned to speak to him. You had 9 years. Marilyn pressed both hands against the table. 3 months later, a second test was performed. The result was worse. Did Grant see it? I don't know. He stopped speaking to me about the clinic. They treated me because he told the doctors he had already been cleared. Marilyn looked up sharply. He said that? That was when I realized Marilyn's secret and Grant's lie were separate. She had hidden the first report, but Grant had received the follow-up himself. He knew the condition had not disappeared, and he still allowed me to carry the blame. At 5:08, headlights crossed the front windows. Grant's truck stopped in the driveway, followed by Tessa's white SUV. Marilyn wiped her face. You need to leave. He can't find you here. I'm not leaving. The front door opened. Grant entered carrying one twin wrapped in a gray blanket. Tessa followed with the other. She wore a cream sweater and the pearl earrings I had given her on her 30th birthday. Grant smiled when he saw his mother. Mom, you're finally a grandmother. Marilyn did not move. She stared at the babies. Then she stared at Tessa. The color drained from her face. She didn't tell you? She whispered. Grant's smile disappeared. Tell me what? Marilyn pushed the fertility report across the table. Tessa looked at me for the first time. What is she doing here? Grant unfolded the document. His eyes moved down the page and stopped at the highlighted section. This is 9 years old, he said. It doesn't prove anything. No, Marilyn answered. But the second report was delivered directly to you 3 months later. Grant's jaw tightened. I don't remember it. I do, I said. That was the week you told me you had been completely cleared. He looked at me. For the first time since the photograph appeared, he had no lie prepared. Marilyn turned toward Tessa. And that is not the test I was talking about. Grant slowly faced her. What test? Marilyn opened a kitchen drawer and removed a folded laboratory invoice. 6 weeks earlier, Tessa had asked Marilyn to pay it because she claimed Grant's business accounts were temporarily frozen. The invoice was for a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. The listed alleged father was Grant Reed. Grant stared at it. Where are the results? Marilyn looked at Tessa. My sister's face answered before her mouth did. You took a paternity test? Grant asked. Tessa pulled the baby closer to her chest. It wasn't reliable. Marilyn shook her head. That is not what you told me. Stay out of this. You called me crying after the results arrived, Marilyn said. You said Grant had been excluded. You begged me not to tell him until after the babies were born. The kitchen went completely silent. Even the babies had stopped moving. Grant crossed the room in 2 steps. You knew they weren't mine? Tessa backed away. I knew the test said you probably weren't. That is not the same thing. I was scared. Grant laughed once. It was a small, broken sound. Whose children are they? Tessa began crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make herself look frightened instead of calculating. I didn't know what else to do. That is not an answer. They're probably Dylan's. Grant moved backward as though she had struck him. One of the babies began crying. Marilyn reached out, but Tessa turned away from her. I was going to tell you, Tessa said, after everything settled down. Grant stared at her. After I paid your rent? After I paid for the hospital? After I built a nursery? After I destroyed my marriage? Tessa's expression hardened. You were already miserable with Allison. Grant looked at me. I saw the precise second he remembered that I had been standing there for the entire collapse. Allison, he said, this isn't what it looks like. I closed my laptop. It looks like you slept with my sister, forged my signature, stole $41,000 from my father's inheritance, and planned to replace me with a family that may never have been yours. His face went pale. Tessa turned toward him. You said the money came from your company. It did. No, I said. Some of it came from the company. The rest came from loans, unpaid suppliers, false invoices, and me. I placed a blue folder on the table. Inside were the bank statements, forged authorization form, false expense records, lien notices, and a stamped copy of the divorce petition Helena had filed on Friday. Grant opened the first page. You filed for divorce? Yes. You can't do this without talking to me. I tried talking to you for 13 years. You chose lying. The doorbell rang. Marilyn flinched. Grant looked toward the hallway. A process server stood on the porch holding a white envelope. Grant Reed? Grant did not answer. The man checked the photograph attached to his paperwork. Mr. Reed, you have been served. They thought the hospital photograph was the beginning of their new family. It became the first exhibit in my case. 3 days later, Grant requested a DNA test through a private laboratory. Tessa refused. Then Dylan Moore hired an attorney and petitioned the court to establish paternity and custody. The court ordered testing. The results arrived 11 days later. There was a 99.99% probability that Dylan was the twins' biological father. Grant came to the house that evening at 9:18. I watched him through the security camera before opening the door. His hair was uncombed, and he wore the same gray jacket he had worn at Marilyn's house. "I lost everything," he said. "No." I kept one hand on the door. "You spent it." He asked to come inside. I refused. He stood beneath the porch light and blamed Tessa first, then Dylan, then the laboratory. Finally, he blamed Marilyn. If my mother had told me the truth 9 years ago, none of this would have happened. I looked at the man who had watched me endure procedures, surgeries, and grief, while knowing his own diagnosis had never been normal. "Your mother hid one report," I said. "She did not put you in my sister's bed. She did not trace my signature. She did not make you steal from my father." His eyes filled with tears. "I made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary." I looked directly at him. "You built an entire life out of choices." That was the last private conversation we ever had. The divorce took 9 months. Grant fought every financial claim. He insisted that I had verbally approved the transfers, but a forensic document examiner determined that my signature had been traced from a refinancing form. Bank login records showed the authorization had been submitted from Grant's office computer at 10:43 p.m. while I was in Denver. Marilyn testified under oath that Grant had received a second copy of his fertility results years earlier. She also admitted hiding the first report from both of us. Her testimony did not excuse her, but it ended his final lie. The bank referred the forged authorization to investigators. Grant eventually accepted a plea agreement involving restitution, probation, and a permanent fraud notation that prevented him from obtaining the commercial credit his company depended on. In the divorce settlement, he was ordered to reimburse the stolen inheritance, contribute to my legal fees, and surrender his share of the equity in our house. A separate tax audit examined the false business expenses. With suppliers already suing for unpaid balances, Grant sold his equipment and closed Reed Commercial Builders. Tessa moved to Nampa to be closer to Dylan's parents. Dylan requested joint custody, and the court established a formal parenting plan. He did not marry her. He did not rescue her. He accepted responsibility for his children and refused to finance the fantasy she had created. My parents begged me to forgive Tessa for the sake of the twins. I told them the children were innocent. Their mother was not. I never punished the babies, but I stopped allowing my family to use them as a doorway back into my life. A year after the divorce, I used part of the recovered money to establish the Reed Financial Review Project. Twice a month, Helena and I help women examine bank statements, property records, debts, credit reports, and suspicious transfers before they sign separation or divorce agreements. The first item displayed in our office is the blue folder from Marilyn's kitchen. Not because I enjoy remembering what happened, because evidence gave me back the truth when the people I loved tried to rewrite it. For years, I believed I had failed to give Grant a family. I let doctors hurt me. I let grief shame me. And I apologized for a burden that had never belonged to me alone. In the end, my victory was not that Grant lost Tessa, the twins, or his company. It was that I stopped carrying consequences created by other people's lies. Generosity does not make a woman disposable. Marriage does not make theft forgivable. And family does not earn the right to betray you simply because they expect you to stay. Truth did not need to scream inside Marilyn's kitchen. It only needed to be placed on the table. If you were in my position, would you have confronted them immediately, or waited until you had enough evidence to make every lie collapse at once? Share your answer in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about quiet people who finally stop paying for someone else's betrayal.